My name is Jerm. This is Jerm Warfare, the battle of ideas.
It's been, I think, about a year, maybe a little bit more. Michael Bryant, thank you for joining me again in the trenches.
Thanks, Jeremy.
I love your work. And I remember chatting to you years ago already. I can't even remember what our first conversation was about. But one of the conversations you and I have had that has stuck with me and has actually had a huge impact is the Spanish flu discussion. I don't know if you remember that one. I know you've chatted about that many times, but it had such a big positive effect on me that it dramatically accelerated my views on germ theory as a whole.
Yeah, thanks a lot. That article was, I feel, one of the bigger and more in-depth treatments of the Spanish flu phenomena overall. And I would hope that anyone who would read that would just take away one thing, and that is to question the official story of what the Spanish flu was or wasn't, and acknowledge that there are many other social conditions, and in this case, a very significant one, World War I, that are the primary causes of what we call disease.
Well, the segue also, I mean, we were just talking a moment ago about our kids being unvaccinated. I say our kids, I've got one boy, but I've got a second boy coming very soon, and both will be unvaccinated. And I know you don't mind me saying, but your two boys who are adults now are also unvaccinated, and they're fine, Michael. They haven't died.
Well, that's the thing, isn't it? You would think that if children there were unvaccinated children, based on the official story that we have pounded into our heads in every single way, day in, day out, week in, week out, year in, year out, that these unvaccinated kids would just be dropping dead. But they aren't. And in fact, they're extraordinarily healthy. And I will say in my case, the decision was based on copious amounts of research. I didn't just, come into this as some revolutionary saying, no, I'm not going to vaccinate because I feel your authority is undeserved, even though it is. I just was about to have a child in my life, and it just seemed odd to me that you would immediately begin injecting this child with some synthetic substances. So at that time, which was 25 years ago now, the research that one had to do, you had to just go into the libraries and get these magazines, articles, and so forth. And I did that, and I spent a lot of time on that. And I came to the conclusion that, these were poisonous substances that really had no place being in the human body. And so, yes, the unvaccinated children are perfectly healthy.
Now, I brought that up because there's a link to our conversation. You wrote a great piece called The Cult of Modern Medical Expertise. And I like your use of the word cult because I have found since the COVID era, Michael, talking about vaccines is a very strange experience. Even in our circles, people get very funny about the word vaccine. It's something that stirs up a weird kind of emotion, something that you would find in a cult.
Yes, and it is something that's been programmed into people, just as you would find in a cult. And, the vaccine is probably certainly one of the most lucrative medical products in the history of history. And therefore, you have this tremendous protection racket surrounding it. And also, the vaccine has created an extraordinary amount of damage to humans. And so it's incumbent upon this cult to shield the public from this reality. And so there's this extraordinary, vast mechanism that is in place to protect that racket and to shield the harms that have been caused by that product.
The cult-like attachment is what fascinates me. It's psychological because we can talk about antibiotics and you don't get the same kind of visceral reaction.
I wonder how much of that too is, the actual, again, I haven't been through this process, but the actual process of, if you're a parent, you bring your young child into the pediatrician's office, and then they get this injection, and you can see that it's a very difficult, painful, traumatic experience for the child, one. And then right after, you see, well, this product made my child sick. And isn't it a mind job that this medical industry has been able to convince people that they give this infant this product, the child gets ill immediately from this product, even if it's a minor illness initially. And they say that is a sign that it is working. No, it's a sign that your child is getting sick from this product. And so I wonder if the parents seeing this then psychologically have to go into this space which allows them to be brainwashed into thinking that, yes, indeed, this product is going to benefit my child in some way. And so then they gradually start to develop these what I might call quasi-religious beliefs in this product, rather than really looking at what's happening right in front of their eyes. Yeah, certainly you're injecting industrial poisons into your child, and if a parent were to be presented with, here are the ingredients of the product, or they were to do the research themselves and say, oh, I've discovered what the ingredients are in this product, and say, wait, that's not something that I want to be in my child, we would see a dramatic reduction in vaccination right away. But there's this incredible cloak of secrecy that surrounds this product, and that's intentional, and secrecy and deception, I would say. Otherwise, people would see it for the madness that it is.
So your article argues basically that the transformation of a doctor who was once perhaps a folksy kind of neighbor, he grew up with you in the family, you'd come and do house visits, is now an imperial minister wielding unassailable expertise, and you cannot ask him any questions.
Yes, how I came to this article, I was originally, and I'm still working on an article that is really exploring the massive, the mammoth medical industry overall, and the financial linkages in this industry with the actual physician that you see when you go to the doctor. How does that all work? And so I put that on the back burner for just a little bit when it came to me that it didn't used to be this way, and I started to wonder about that. I said to myself, how is it that we've come from this moment where there was this humble doctor who may live right across the street from you when you were younger, and in fact that was the case for myself, who lived in a middle to lower middle class neighborhood, didn't have any trappings of society, didn't have any fancy cars, big house, and you would encounter this person in your day-to-day lives at the grocery store or Little League baseball games. How did it come to the fact that now this person who is a distant person in this mansion, and they represent someone who is the godlike deity that oversees this medical industry, that is your first entry point into this mammoth medical industry? How did that happen? And I had some suspicions about it, but as I delved deeper into this topic, I really began to unpack what was a rather large social engineering project that has been underway since the late 1800s, early 1900s, and then really accelerated after World War II. And the conclusion is ultimately that none of this is by accident. This was all socially engineered. None of this was due to these experts having better medical practices, or that the science had improved and moved on and progressed tremendously. This was all about financial incentives and socially engineering the population to hold these beliefs through large PR firms manipulating the public. and that is indeed what you find as you unpack this a little bit more.
I mean, the idea of a sort of country doctor, it is a little bit romanticized, but doctors were once upon a time actually interested in your family history. If you go to a doctor now, Michael, he charges you for 15 minutes.
Yes, let me give you my personal anecdote on this, which was really kind of a very cool and amazing thing for me when writing this article. So as I looked into, the country doctor, and I agree with you, you don't want to romanticize anything too much. I came across this book, and it was purely unintentional. And this book was authored by this gentleman, and you'll see it in the first link in the article, this gentleman, Dr. Barry Ladd. That was my doctor when I was a kid growing up. So I find this book, and this is going to be included in my article, and I do a double take. Wait a minute. That's my doctor up until I was 13 years old, right? So that was very cool. And he did literally live across the street and 2 houses down from where we were at. And interestingly, and then I've talked to my older brothers about this because they would have better memories than I on this, due to the fact that they were older at the time. We never went to see this guy. We went to see this guy. When I say never, I mean I probably went in to his office in my life 3 or 4 times, and that was to get stitches, to have my ankle repaired. You went to see the doctor when you had an illness, or an injury that you couldn't attend to at home. And so I wondered, what happened here? How is it now that we have all of these visits, all of these wellness visits, this nonstop array of shots that kids are getting? And I realized that back when I was a kid, none of this happened. And he was a folksy kind of guy in this case, and he was someone who had his hunting dogs, and he was a fisherman, and he had no airs about him whatsoever. And we rarely saw him.
What is the point of a doctor?
I think it depends on whose perspective you have. If you're the industry, if you're a private equity firm, the point of a doctor is to generate revenue. And that's who's, Wall Street is controlling that industry. So that's the point of the doctor from their perspective. I would say from the people's perspective, the point of the doctor should be to take care, to help get you repaired when you're ill, to help you with any sort of traumatic injuries that you have. That is one area where what's called allopathic medicine is excellent at, stitching you up, maybe a hip replacement if you need it later on, though you have to be careful with those too, and anything. There are a lot of things that, could happen to us now that if they happened to us in 1920, we would die from. Okay. However, those things are nominal when you look at the big picture. So when it comes to emergency care, trauma care, great. When it comes to overall chronic illnesses, if you're relying on your doctor, and don't take this as medical advice, but I would suggest that if you're relying on your doctor as relates to internal conditions, you're probably going to be spiraling downward from there.
About a year ago, no, maybe a bit more than that, we went camping, and with this very knife you see in front of you, I accidentally sliced my hand open, and I needed stitches. Interestingly enough, while I was with him, he asked me if I wanted a tetanus shot, at which point I said no. And he said, "Do you understand the risks of not having the shot?" And I said, "I do." And I never got the shot, and I'm fine.
Yes, I think it was Dr. Robert Mendelsohn, someone can double check on that, who spoke to the absurdity of the tetanus shot, here in the late 20th and early 21st century. So that again it's a cell, right? And that's what most of these physicians are immersed in, sadly. And I think those who educate themselves on this can really quickly see the absurdity of virtually all of these shots. And in fact, I would say all of these shots. They don't do anything but cause harm.
Not everything that let's say a teacher does at a school is necessarily the best. They just adhering to a curriculum that was given to them. It's the same
Yes.
thing with the medical industry. They're following a particular curriculum, so to speak. And I struggle with that because I don't want to make them feel bad about doing the best that they can. And then they go, but you're not a doctor, so who are you to make the claims that you're making?
Yes, I get into those sorts of discussions with doctors quite a bit. Fortunately, I'm armed with a lot of facts and details due to the research that I do. So those conversations invariably don't go very well for the doctors, and then they back out of it. And that's relying on that fallacy of expertise. That I am a doctor, therefore I know better, and you can usually disarm them with a couple of very specific questions to do that. But you're right. Your doctor friends in the whole industry right now, they're not trained to look at you as a whole individual and make an analysis based on that and ask the sort of questions that can uncover what might be troubling you when you go to the doctor's office. What they're trained to do right now is ask you off of a very specific menu questions that point you towards specific diagnostics, which they are obligated to ask you, and those diagnostics they are obligated to, at the very least, push you towards. And then they want to go from those diagnostics to getting you involved in that system so that they can start the money train rolling with you as what is a node on their bottom line, on their you're an investment product for them. And that's not you're correct. It's not to say that they're evil. It's not they're not malicious. They're not trying to harm you necessarily. I don't believe that. However, they are administratively programmed to put you in a path that will ultimately cause harm to you if you follow that path. It's just inevitable that will happen if you get on the pharmaceutical gravy train, and that's where these things ultimately are headed.
I made a joke with one of my doctor friends recently, and I said, have you ever had somebody come to see you and you realized there was nothing wrong and you just sent them away? And the answer is no, because they feel like they are failing at their job.
Yes. It's interesting. I go to the doctor once a year, and that's it, to have this checkup and so forth. And some of that is in large part, to my beautiful wife to say she wants me to go once a year, and I do it, right? So I go to the doctor's office. It's a 15-minute visit, and get me out of the barber's chair and get me out of the doctor's office. And I'm sitting there, and the doctor that we have by today's standards is an enlightened, progressive individual. Okay. However, that bar is pretty low. So I sit there, and she looks at her screen. She rarely looks over at me as I'm sitting right there. And I'll keep her anonymous. And she says, you're 63 now. Do you want to go and get this test? I said, no, I'm not going to do that. Well, you really need to have no, I'm not going to do that. Well, you really need to. And she's looking at the screen the whole time. Okay. She's not asking me, how fit are you? How are, have you had any illnesses? I haven't been ill in years. And and I finally will say to her, I say, look, I know we have to do this dance, but I'm not going to do any of that. And she says, it's the same little scene we play, the same little cartoon that we have. She says, I know, but I have to ask you. And she's just looking at the screen the whole time. And what, one of the things that concerns me about that visit it really doesn't have anything to do with myself, because I take care of my own health, is that as she's probing with these questions, I could see where someone else sitting there starts to feel a little insecure, a little bit fearful, a little bit, well, wait a minute, do I need to have my cholesterol? My cholesterol might be a little off. Do I, yeah, oh no, what about my liver enzymes? Are they, all this sort of stuff. And they'll quickly say, well, okay, I'll do that one. They'll concede, they'll give in, and then they go and they get that test. And that, these tests, if you and I went and received 10 different diagnostic tests from a physician's clinic, especially, at my age at 60, 63, am I 63 or 64? No, I'll be 64 in October. Hold on. So
Michael, you don't look a day past 72.
Yeah, thank you. Well, I feel great. That's what I base it on. Well, if you're my age and you go get these 10 tests that this doctor is suggesting you get, you're not going to get a 10 out of 10 on all 10 of these tests. So a couple of those tests, you're probably going to get a 7 out of 10, and they'll want you to be on some medication, right? They will suggest that you get on some medication. So individuals who don't arm themselves with the fact and are maybe not feeling 100% would easily be cowed into, I could see where they would be cowed into saying, yes, I need to take that test. I need to get on that medication. I need to, et cetera, et cetera. And then again, once you get on that, the feedback loop kicks in and you become, lucrative product for that industry.
What is the Flexner Report?
Yes, that's a great question. And the Flexner Report, as I would guess many of your listeners know, was a seminal report in the medical industry that really, really changed the entire direction of the medical industry. And while I say that, I think it's also very important to recognize that had we not had the Flexner Report, it would have been the Davis Report or the Jones Report or the Washington Report. And what I mean by that is the Flexner Report, which was written in 1910, and it was funded by the Carnegies and the Rockefellers. The Carnegies were the steel magnates, the Rockefellers, the oil magnates, and then they went into the petrochemical and pharmaceutical industry as well. The Flexner Report, which was written in 1910, was actually the foundations for it were written in 1906. So this preceded Flexner, and the report itself wasn't written as it presented itself by an independent force, an independent individual, which was Abraham Flexner. It was written by the AMA already in 1906. And the reason they had Abraham Flexner write this report, and I can get into some of the details about what he actually did. The reason why they had him write the report is that they could present this then as this independent analysis of the overall medical system and hospital system in the United and practicing physician system in the United States at the time. Abraham Flexner was not involved in the medical field in any way, shape, or form. He was an educational theorist. And so that is why they say they wanted him to be the individual that issued this report, because then they wouldn't be seen, they being the AMA and the millionaire philanthropists that were behind the report, they wouldn't be seen as having a conflict of interest, and this wouldn't be risking any public outrage or antitrust violations. So what's of particular note is Abraham Flexner had a brother. His name was Simon Flexner. And Simon Flexner was a deeply embedded with the Rockefeller Institute. He was the head of the Rockefeller Institute's medical education board. Okay, and so they had already written the groundwork for what Flexner would discover when he made his 16-month journey across the United States, examining all of the various medical institutions in the United States. I want to say there were 155 at the time. And they had already targeted the ones that they wanted to eliminate, and therefore consolidate and monopolize a certain type of medical industry and medical practices, which is what we endure today. And it's also interesting to note that Flexner didn't himself go alone. It wasn't just that they hired him independently and said, you know what, Abraham, we want you to travel around the U.S. and you just see what you see. Take notes on what you see and tell us what you think the state of medicine is in the United States here in 1909, 1910, 1911. Okay, he was accompanied by a gentleman, Dr. Nathan Colwell, who was the secretary of the AMA Council on Medical Education. And Colwell was really the individual who was the one who wrote the evaluations, and they already knew which schools they were going to target for elimination. So, the Flexner Report in the end analysis was just a cudgel to wipe out all of these other competing schools, eclectic schools, homeopathic schools, chiropractic schools, naturopath schools that were deemed to be illegitimate competitors to the allopathic model. Now, of note, many of your listeners will probably know this. John Rockefeller Sr., his doctor was a homeopath, and he didn't change that.
Okay, so basically 75% of medical schools were shut down as a result of the Flexner Report.
Yes, they were. Now, the Flexner Report didn't have any legal weight behind it. So, they couldn't take this report, and the report's rather long. And if you read it, it's going through state by state, school by school, and giving assessments of the schools. They couldn't go into a school that the Flexner Report suggested was substandard and just say, okay, the Flexner Report states this, therefore we're shutting you down. What they did is they developed state medical boards, and then they ultimately developed the federal medical boards to get all the states to align with certain standards. And through these boards, they developed mandatory licensing mechanisms. So the individuals who would go to a certain school now were mandated to get their license through these specific state boards, and only these state boards. And if they did not, they could not practice medicine. And the one thing they did do on a federal level is they changed the statutory definitions of what practicing medicine meant, and they broadened the definition. So now anything that an individual is doing essentially that is treating another individual, whether it's with herbs or bloodletting or anything, okay, was considered practicing medicine. And with that, legally now, to practice medicine, you had to have these specific licenses. Going with that, to get those specific licenses, you could only then get them if you were at a certain classification of school. They just called them Class A schools. So if you did not attend a Class A school, you were not even allowed to take the licensing exam in that state to get that license. Then if you didn't have that license, there were now laws put in place that if you were practicing medicine in that state, you could be fined and you could face arrest. So it was a fairly sophisticated legislative set of maneuvers that they began putting in place post-Flexner Report, particularly in the 1920s.
So what do you think was going on? Was the Flexner Report about improving medical standards, or were the standards perhaps just a PR cover for eliminating competition and perhaps capturing the market?
Yes, the latter. Yeah, the context of the historical times is very important. This was when, this was the Gilded Age, and the robber barons were not just monopolizing the medical industry; they were monopolizing, attempting to monopolize virtually all sorts of sectors. Agricultural sector. The very important part was the educational sector, where they were developing. They used a similar model where they developed an education board where you had to have very specific education standards for what was becoming compulsory schooling, and so these were all interwoven. So the idea that there could be a free market of ideas, free market of medical practice, a free etc., were being absolutely wiped out. Industrial capitalism was going at a very fast pace now to monopolize this new petroleum-based, chemical-based, what they called scientific-based. They called it scientific medicine, and eliminate all competition.
So the Flexner Report, from what I understand, was looking at quote unquote one cause, one cure, essentially reducing the human body to a collection of isolated mechanical parts. Do you think that was by design?
I do. I see that happened as a byproduct, what you just described, as far as atomizing the entire structure of the biological system. I see that as a byproduct of the entities that were pushing this new model of medicine, revolutionary allopathic model of medicine. They also had profound conflicts of interest in that they were involved in this new petrochemical industry that was developing the sort of what do they call it? Medicine based on chemistry, better chemistry. What is it? There was a commercial about this: better chemistry, better life through better chemistry, or something like this. And so they were saying they were identifying these specific microbes, and then they would have these specific chemicals that could impact these specific microbes, and then we can patent that. And then once we can patent that, that is a product which we and only we own, and for you to access that, you have to bring your revenue into our stream. So I think that is, to my mind, that is the source of it, rather than someone just coming up with the idea that, okay, here we have this small problem that this person is having, and that's all we need to address. This small problem that this person is having internally can't possibly be caused by or be connected to any other situation that may be having internally, that individual may be having internally. I think it is that they had the need to isolate all of these functions of the human body so that they could have their mode of industrial medicine become mandated and profitable for them. I hope that made sense, Sarah.
In other words, if the body is an integrated, self-regulating ecosystem, then the Flexner idea of one cause, one cure is fundamentally flawed.
It is, and it doesn't make sense. I think just if you can get someone to pause and just say, I want you to think about this idea and put aside all you've been indoctrinated with, and don't accept or reject this idea, but just think about it. Does it really make sense that if you have this problem with your bladder, that it could be caused by some other issues relating to other facets of your body, other facets of what's happening with your life, specifically things you're eating, things you're drinking, and so on. And could it be that this issue that you're having with your bladder is a signal? It's not really a cause. And I think if you kind of keep it in simple terms in conversations, it just makes sense to folks that, it's not just this issue that I'm having with my bladder. Something else is causing this.
But I mean, just to add to that, the idea that you can boost your immune system. I mean, this has been a huge thing. Take this multivitamin and it will strengthen your immune system, as if your immune system is some isolated thing that can just, it exists on its own.
Yeah, there's certain people that are, out on the cutting edge of this, and I don't know enough about this to comment on it intelligently, that would suggest that there's no such thing as the immune system, and that, they say, can you show me the immune system? And, I don't accept or reject it. I don't understand it. I haven't looked into it, probably won't. But I accept that that's a possibility, that, what is this immune system? And for me, it's, can I take care of the things that are, keeping my body strong, keeping my body well? And do I really need to, it might be an interesting academic exercise, but I don't think I need to know about the immune system, though I'm glad other people are asking these questions.
No, but I think the point I'm making, Michael, is not whether it exists or not. I'm just saying that if you're going to eat healthy, your entire body benefits from that, not just one portion of it.
Yeah, absolutely. Right. And if you're not, the same. And it's going to, it's not like if you're really, you're drinking a lot, you're smoking, you're doing everything you could to make yourself sick. It's not as if, at least initially, your entire body collapses. It manifests in one area, in one specific place. However, there are a lot of things that are going wrong at that time. And to me, this might be a little far afield. To me, my current view of what cancer is, I don't really believe that there is such a thing as cancer per se. I believe there's a massive cancer industry that needs you to think that. My view of it is that, what they are calling cancer of the liver, cancer of the esophagus, and so forth, is a concentration of toxins, and that that specific concentration is almost a protection mechanism of your body, and that if you can attend to that, whatever it is you need to be doing to cleanse your body, then that concentration of toxins is going to be diminished. There can be a certain point, I believe, where you can't do much about it, but that's my current view of the cancer.
There's an immense hubris today within the medical scientific community that you question them. How dare you question them, Michael? And it's as though we assume we've somehow reached the pinnacle of medical and scientific understanding, and what they got wrong in the 1940s about tobacco and cigarettes, whatever, that was then. Now we know everything that there is to know. But in 50 years' time, they're going to look back and they're going to go, these guys were wrong on all of this stuff.
Yes. What's interesting is that during this time that we're discussing about the Flexner Report in the early 1900s and so forth, if you can just kind of talk to the person on the street, they'll be like, well, what about all of those practices that were just brutal? What about bloodletting? What about da, da, da? And you go back and you look at it and you say, well, what was considered the conventional, acceptable, recommended, and widely used practice of the allopathic medicine was calomel. It was mercury poisoning. So it wasn't like these herbalists and naturopaths were doing this. And I think here we are, 100 years later, and we're seeing that the medical establishment is still, and even more so, poisoning people with these micro doses of poisoning day in and day out that are causing lots of harm to people and defending that practice.
But those micro doses of poison are not just physical, they're also abstract. Think about the curriculum that doctors learn, that scientists learn, and changing that, I'm guessing, takes generations.
Yeah, so you're talking more along the lines of the physicians themselves or the nurses themselves, and yeah, well, once you get into that, I don't. That's going to be really difficult to change individuals who have been through that process, because their entire life is now built on that process, not just ideologically, but physically. They've invested years and years and years of their life. They've got a fortune tied up into this. They've usually have a lot of debt from medical school and so forth, and then all their entire social status is based on this now, and they have an elevated status in society due to their position. They've got a boat sitting out there. They've got this nice house. They've got all the trappings. So it's going to be really difficult to unravel all that. And for any individual who has been through all of those years of training or indoctrination, I would say is more accurate, and has all of these now benefits from those years, even though there's this crushing debt on the other side, to just toss all of that aside and say, you know what, all of that was wrong. I've just wasted 15 years of my life going down this path, and I'm not doing these patients any good at all. And again, I want to reiterate that that's not a blanket statement. There are physicians out there that are helping people. So
Yeah, but it's not just them. It's also the system itself.
Yeah, absolutely. That's exactly the point. Yeah, it's the system, doesn't allow for physicians to have much freedom, much flexibility in it. It's quite rigid, and it's if you don't adhere to the mandates of that system, I talked about the carrots there, where you get all the trappings, the boat and the nice house and all that stuff. But there's also the stick, and that if you don't adhere to the dictates of this system, you're going to get a electronic knock on your computer that says, "Hey, we see you didn't do this." All right, and then there's a gradation of that. If you don't prove that you've kind of gone back in line and you're adhering to the diagnostic criteria, you're doing what the code tells you to do. If you're not doing that, you're going to get some taps on the head, and then it'll progress from there. You'll maybe be asked to, if you continue to be a little bit too radical, you'll be asked to go before the board, and then you'll be threatened with your license and so on and so forth.
Hence the war on alternative medicine.
Yeah, health is pretty simple. There are some extreme examples, but they're so rare as to not even be of consequence. But health for 99.9% of people walking on the planet is quite simple. If you have regular and regular healthy food, and you're out exercising, doesn't have to be radical exercise, walking, and you have a fulfilling social life, you're going to stay healthy for a pretty long time, barring any major accident, or you're near any industrial waste site, all these other things. So the medical industry doesn't want that. If you do have some minor issues coming up, you can usually resolve those through some sort of easy, natural means. I'll just leave it, generally at that. And that means you're a customer loss to the medical industry if you're doing these sorts of things. So also, if you can see that as a possibility, if that exists, if these alternative methods exist. If you hear from your neighbor, I had the same thing as you. All I did was I went, right? Then you say, oh, I don't need to go spend, $1,000 on the doctor with my $250 copay and all this sort of stuff. I can just go over here and spend $18 and get this, and this is going to take care of it. Or I don't need to do anything. I'm a believer in doing nothing. right? Like I said, I haven't been ill in a long time, but I feel like most problems people have, they can attend to even without what's called alternative methods, even without pills. They don't need to be taking vitamins. They don't need many, if any, of these things, in my opinion. I think there might be, again, some examples of it, but I think most of that is overstated as well.
Michael, a good Shiraz, a glass on
There
a
you
daily
go.
basis.
Yeah. Yeah, you don't have, no one has to be a purist here. You can have a good chocolate chip cookie. Okay, you can have
Well,
good
that's got
potato
sugar in
chips.
it. That's
Yeah,
got sugar.
yeah,
Although,
that's
mind you,
yeah.
Shiraz has got alcohol in it. But I live on a vineyard.
Okay, so you're pushing your product there, then, aren't you? All right, no,
No. It's not mine. It's
no,
not
you
mine.
don't. Okay,
I
you
just
right.
drink.
Yeah, you don't have to be a purist in life. You can, I would stay away from the processed sugar and stay away from processed food overall. Again, I'm not a dietitian or whatever their labels are or anything like that, but keep it simple and don't overindulge and you're also, I think, every little ache and pain, every little time you're feeling a little under the weather, you don't have to feel too anxious about it. It's a natural condition, and especially as you get a little bit older, you're not going to wake up feeling super spry every single day. You don't need to go to the cabinet and try to get a pill that's going to alleviate every little illness or ache or pain that you have. And you start doing that, and you're usually asking for trouble. That would be my 2 cents on that.
All the way back to the beginning of the discussion about the cult and how it became that, because the dogma around the medical industry has become Pythonesque in its absurdity.
Yeah. Well, it was a rather elaborate campaign that they set on over years and years, and it was in concert with the development of the public relations industry. Excuse me. So post World War II, the allopathic medical industry was really taking over. They were eliminating all of these other competing ideas of medical schools, and it wasn't necessarily embraced by the public. So they really needed to convince the public that this was not only the only way, but this was the best way. This was the way towards medical miracles, scientific miracles. And so they did a number of different things to convince the public of that. One was that they set out on a campaign, but they hired what was essentially the first large scale political consulting and lobbying group, which was called Campaigns Incorporated. And through this organization, they distributed literature throughout the United States, in medical establishments, doctor's office, but also in Rotary clubs, schools. They used, the those that time's version of influencers, all sorts of institutional settings, everywhere you could think of. They distributed over 55 million pieces of literature to convince people that this way of medicine was the enlightened way that we all had to adhere to. It wasn't like people voted on this, right? And then they also, at the same time, right in the 1950s, there was a huge 16 millimeter campaign in the school systems, meaning 16 millimeter film campaign in the school systems that was propagandizing school children on any number of topics. A big one was the medical industry. So they were sending out these films that they would watch in the classrooms, where they were changing the child's view of the doctor as just some ho-hum neighbor friendly guy, to this guy in this white lab coat who came in and did heroic things to make that child's life better, and that you're to trust that individual with your health. above your own senses, above your parents, above everything. At the same time, the schools were becoming one of the institutional parts of this new system in that they were turning schools into, you know, in the loose sense of the term, medical surveillance centers. We had the school nurse now. They were having vaccination drives in schools. They were having education campaigns in schools. If you were to miss school for a day, you now had to have a note from your doctor to go through the nurse. It wasn't that you could have a parental note any longer. So that was one facet of it. Another facet of it was in the burgeoning television industry at the time. They developed these programs. What was it? What, Dr. Kildare? There were several television programs, and they actually had the AMA on the sets, and the AMA was designing the not just the set and the type of machinery that they would be using, but they were orchestrating the dialogue, and they were orchestrating the presentation of how this doctor would be shown to the public through these regular programs. And then there were all sorts of advertisements through Life magazine, Saturday Evening Post, Time magazine, that were in there constantly. And they were hiring actors to be in these paid advertisements in these magazines. And these actors were, very, very handsome, striking guys, sometimes smoking cigarettes. They were posing as doctors. And they were, these doctors in these advertisements were iconic cultural figures. They weren't now just sort of homey town figures. They became heroic, epic figures that we were all to, hand over our bodies to, all right, in exchange for what we were told was going to be, medical salvation, or perhaps, if we're lucky, eternal life. So it was a massive social engineering project.
I'm remembering back to the COVID era when Fauci said, if you question me, you question the science.
Yeah, that would perhaps be what would we call that, the apex of the nadir, or the nadir of the apex of this whole thing, and in some respects, we're seeing that all crashing down now, which is a good thing. And I don't mean that, I don't mean that just as relates to Fauci, but we're seeing, when we hear other political bureaucrats, and even quite a few on the good side of the thing, good side of, the health freedom movement or whatever, say, well, we need to restore trust. We need to, no, that's the last thing we need. We need to blast this whole thing apart, because it's not doing anybody any good. It's not just because you and I are sitting here and have some different ideas about it. We're witnessing it. It's not doing anybody any good. And it wasn't long before the COVID scam came along. And certainly it's damaging people at an even greater rate right now. And you know what, Jeremy, I mentioned to you off air. I think more and more people they definitely are waking up to, or at least questioning it. And in the United States, a report just came out 2 days ago, was it? May have even been yesterday. And this is a CDC report. And of course, they're concerned about this, that in the United States, for the second year, they have record high reporting of unvaccinated children in kindergarten. And so that's not something we need to restore trust in so that we can get those children vaccinated again. We need to continue to move that needle in a way that prevents children from getting these poisons injected into them, and allows them to have a healthy whole life.
As we said off air, I'm seeing an increasing number of people in our circles turning away from vaccinations. And I mean for their kids also, not just themselves.
Yeah, I'm seeing that also. I talk to a lot of people that are within the health freedom movement, and they I think they go back and forth on those, how those conversations can be had to impact more people, and those are good conversations to have. I find the conversations work best when you keep it really simple, and you know don't burden the parent who has already vaccinated their children with any sort of guilt or any you're not the one to blame. You've got this entire industry. There's this entire infrastructure that's not only trying to persuade you, but in a lot of times is actively coercing you or mandating that you do this. But there are ways that you can both break free from that cult, break out of it, and then there are ways where you can physically get around, having to vaccinate your child. I don't know how it is where you is. I think it's a lot easier in other places in the United States. In certain places, it's difficult to do, but there are ways. And, you just do what's best for your child, and don't allow this industry to, shove its agenda into your child.
The average person researches their next cell phone more than what they inject into their child.
Yeah. I don't even know what to say about that. I know that it's true and it's disturbing.
I mean, if you just think about it, right? They'll say to us, no, but you must trust the experts. When it comes to vaccines, trust the doctors or trust the scientists. Okay, all right, fine. So when it comes to my cell phone, I'll trust the manufacturer, or I'll trust the cell phone sales guy. I mean, he knows more than I, so I won't research anything. I'll just buy the one that he recommends.
Well, yeah, you're right, and that is happening. However, I do believe that there are all sorts of openings out there, and it's okay for one to create that opening in the middle of the line at the grocery store. It's okay to steer a conversation, without being too obstructive. It's okay to steer a conversation towards just getting some information in there, and it can be done in a quite a reasonable way. And as you do that does impact some people. You might be talking to someone who you're having a bit of a contentious discussion with, and they're really vaccines uberologists, and the medical industry, the pharmaceutical industry, uberalis. And yet you're having that conversation, and there's two or three other people on the outside of that conversation. And one of those individuals is hearing that and hearing some things for the first time that causes them to look into it, because they are seeing, well, wait a minute, he's describing just what happened to, Joan's child. He's describing just what happened to my Uncle Phil. Are these sorts of things, and I think that's a good way to move the needle just a little bit, and don't be afraid of those conversations. Be smart, and you can definitely make an impact on these in these kind of ways, I guess.
How can I find this article and follow your work in general?
The article can be found at Health Freedom Defense Fund. There's a Substack and there is a website. So this specific article is titled "The Cult of Modern Medical Expertise." It's found at healthfreedomdefense.org. And that's where I do virtually all of my writing. At globalresearch.ca, I do know that they pick up some of these articles, most of these articles, off of the HFDF website. So that's another place where people can find these articles. And I just want to encourage everybody to, think for themselves and challenge their own assumptions about the medical industry, and take care of, take control. I would say take control of your own health and well-being. Don't rely on experts. Don't get in that cult. And you can, if you're not already healthy, if you are already healthy, you'll stay healthy. If you aren't, you can find a path to health. You can definitely do it.
Michael Bryant, thank you for joining me in the trenches.
Hey, thanks a lot for having me, Jeremy. I really always enjoy our conversations.
Thanks for watching to the end of the video. If you got value from it, consider joining as a channel member, which directly supports what we do here. The link is below, and if you're hungry for more, here are 2 more videos for you, and we'll see you in the next one.